welcome all. Thank you for coming to the open weekend. It's such a treat to see you. So this is a talk on bespoke yarns because I find it embarrassing to talk about myself too much, and I really admire what all of these people do, so you know. I want to come to some of the talks and learn interesting things as well, basically. My name is Sonja, for anyone who doesn't know, and I'm one of the directors of John Arbon Textiles. And then I will just quickly go ahead and introduce all of these amazing people. And really, it's kind of more about them than it is about us. I'll obviously join in the conversation a bit, but really I just wanted to highlight other folks in the industry who are doing things that I think is really special and important. And, you know, I think the thing with the British yarn industry is there's so many amazing sheep and breeds and blends, and there are so many people doing things that's unique. And I think like a rising tide lifts all boats. We're as avid crafters, nobody is just gonna knit with one kind of thing until the end of time. So that's the beauty of crafting, for me at least, is that every garment I make has a different feel or a different texture or a different colour palette. So, you know, and that really just enriches the whole thing. So, yeah, the reason I've invited these people is because they all make bespoke yarn. And I'll just go through and introduce you briefly, and then I'll let you introduce yourselves properly and talk about how you got into kind of creating your own bases and why you decided to start businesses, but then also, rather than kind of purchasing a base from another mill or having something off the shelf, what led you to kind of decide you wanted to actually make the yarn as well. So we've got Becci and Markus from RiverKnits, and we've got Rachel from Daughter of a Shepherd, who's also vending outside, so you can have a proper squish on Rachel's yarn. And then we've got Marina from Marina Skua as well. And both Becci and Markus and Marina have bought some lovely samples, so we will pass them round, but also please do go find their websites and follow them on Instagram and inform yourselves more as well. So yeah, that's it for the intros, I think. Oh, and then one last thing is, it's quite a relaxed chat. We all know each other, there's not too many of us, so please do just pop your hand up if you have a question or there's something you'd like to say. So I think it's going to be sort of quite an unstructured, we'll just see what comes up in the room. So if we start, we can go this direction. So if you two want to explain, I don't actually know what prompted you to start. I think that's the thing, is like we see each other in shows and we're all good friends, but then it's like you don't really talk about like people's origin stories or like, because I know you were dyeing before you started making your own bases, weren't you?
Yeah.
So what kind of prompted you to go down that road?
Well, I would say that we started RiverKnits because we wanted to have, you know, creative freedom, really, to make what we want to make, and then also to pass that on to our customers. And actually, the custom bases started very early on in our journey, although we were using sort of more commonly available yarns as well. But well, at RiverKnits, we think that when you're making things, that it should have as low an impact on the environment as possible. And we also think that it's best if it can have a positive impact on the people around you in your community, or the people you make for, or the people that you do business with. So that just very naturally led us down the path of doing our own custom bases with those things in mind. So yeah, I mean, we started off very, very small. So we did have to, and as Sonja said, we did start off as yarn dyers. So we were sort of wholesaling yarns that you can get. But we had our minds quite fixed on where we wanted to be, which was all British wool, all manufactured all the processing done in the UK as well. And then eventually, in the last couple of years, we moved and started this project called Northampton Shear. Little pun there. So we're based in Northamptonshire, and we were able to seek out local flocks of really quite special breeds as well, and have those fleeces spun into yarns.
And what have you got with?
Okay, so with us from the Northamptonshire range, we've got, this is a Leicester Longwool. I'll pass these round in a bit. So this comes from a flock which is 5 miles away from our studio. And the guys who rear these sheep favour the black Leicester Longwools, hence the lovely natural colour in here. The black Leicester Longwools actually tend from a very dark black through to sort of silvery colours as well, and they have white Leicester Longwools in their flock as well.
But they're quite rare, aren't they? Like
The black ones
black,
are really quite rare, so it was very special to find it just down the road from us. So that's a long wool with a really long staple fibre and quite a lot of lustre, and also a lovely kind of fuzzy halo. So
Shall I pass them around?
so that's the natural. And then I can pass some swatches around as well. So there's a knit swatch and a crochet swatch. And I'll just show you a garment as well done in it, so you can see it's got quite a lot of drape. Yeah, it's very swingy. It actually feels really quite luxurious on, which I don't think you often think of wool as being a luxurious fibre, but it definitely has that feel to it.
Are the Leicester Longwools, they're on the RBST. They're like on the very endangered, the red list, aren't they, I think, as well. So it's kind of preserving the... It's a similar thing.
Preserving
the breed
it is
as well.
And it's really interesting talking to the people who own these, relatively, tiny flocks, aren't they?
They are.
And you ask them, why are you doing this? Because it's not a commercial flock. You're not really earning a great living from these flocks, but the people that keep the sheep that we get the wool from, they're really passionate about conservation, and they're really passionate about keeping those breeds going, and
the genetic pool going.
And then these people are really vital to the British wool industry, because they're keeping all these different breeds, which then their genetics can carry on into the bigger commercial flocks and things like that. So that's the Leicester Longwool. And then another one that we have is a Shetland, and they're from this yarn is from a flock about 8 miles away from us. We met a couple who have been keeping Shetlands for 17 years, and they started keeping them as a bit of a hobby, something to do. And then they started looking into the breed standard for Shetlands and realised that the wool is really a big deal with Shetlands. And so for 17 years they've been carefully breeding and selecting their sheep for the wool. And this flock, they just go around to all the shows in the country and are bringing back first prizes left, right and centre.
It's incredible.
The wool just has to be felt to be believed, to be honest. It's just very, very soft, a lot softer than what you might think of from Shetland. So there's a few samples going around.
So we are quite proud that we were able to make this all happen, Really.
And
it's so local to us as well. So we meet these people regular, and then they do the shearing. We sometimes go over and be with them, take photos, and
Yeah, we just saw, so this comes from the flock in Braunston, and then some friends of ours have bought some sheep from these people as well. So the local the local Shetland population is growing.
Yes. It's a cunning plan from us to have more Shetlands. So
yeah, we managed to influence a little bit of decision making in our local area.
Find all the smallholders.
Convince them they need Shetlands.
Yeah. It was great. I mean, the people who've bought them are fellow boaters. We live on a boat, on a narrow boat, and we stayed on, they've got some land by the canal, and they let us stay when we had engine trouble and we needed to take our engine apart. And we were looking at the land that we've got, and we were saying, I don't know why they don't keep some sheep here. And then by the time we were leaving, they said, we were thinking about getting some sheep. And like, great. Let's
guess
put
what
you
we
in touch.
suggested. Yes.
Did you get this one in the same place?
No. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
the long wool is
it's
worsted spun, and it's 2-ply.
But
It's a low
it's a
twist.
twofold, yeah.
So if we go down and everyone can pass their samples round, and then maybe we can get into mills and woolen and worsted, etc. So, because otherwise we'll go off on a crazy tangent and then never make it to Marina. So how about you, Rachel? You've got all these gorgeous heathered dark things in front of you.
I'm
Tell
like
us
the
about
complete
them.
antithesis.
Tell us about yourself.
So I'm Rachel from Daughter of a Shepherd, and I am the daughter of a shepherd. My dad kept sheep. Well, he trained dogs. He used to have German shepherds and to do police dog training, and then he went into border collies. And because he got the border collies, he then needed some sheep. He got the dogs first. Yeah, the dogs came first, and then the sheep. But this was all the while he was working. He was a travelling salesman selling ladies' lingerie. So this was like his hobby on an evening and the weekends. And that we just grew up in just a regular estate in a a normal house, but he'd rent land for the sheep. And just kind of fast forward years and years, and he was he'd heard about a scheme with Hebridean sheep. They were trying to find a really good sheep for conservation grazing, and the Hebrideans had been touted as the best ones, so there was a scheme to test it. So he got involved in that, and at the same time on a nature reserve just outside York, they were also on this scheme and released, I think it was 150 sheep into about 600 acres of woodland, and then realised they couldn't actually get them back. So somebody somehow they got hold of Dad, and he was like, okay, yeah, you need a shepherd, I'll come down with the dogs. And he started working there, and they gradually increased the flock. And the Hebrideans, if you're familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're quite a small hardy sheep, and they live outside all year round. They lamb outside. They never come into the barn. In fact, they don't have a barn to put them in, but they work as conservation grazing. And I was up there about 8 years ago, and it was an Easter, and Dad had just had his wool check through, and you get the year after you've sent the clip, you'll get a 10% check of what the final value is. And he was like, guess how much it is? And this was for, I think it was about 300 or 400 sheep, and it came to 92 pence for the 10%, so he was going to get a total of £9.20. And there's like various reasons, because they live outside in woodland, so it's the fleece can get quite matted, and it has a lot of vegetable matter in, but also because it's a naturally black wool, you can't dye it, so it doesn't have as much value in the wool industry and the textile industry. And at the time I was working as a tech editor for various magazines and books and things, and an avid knitter, and I was like, well, I'd really love to knit with this colour wool, it's amazing. And so the estate agreed that I could buy the clip, and then I approached John Alban Textiles, and they said they'd have a go at spinning it for me, and we went from there. And it was supposed to be like a one-off experiment, and just to prove that we could add more value to the fleece than what it had been valued at, and it went from there. And and here I am 8 years later, with all the various yarns. But I tend to try and take black yarn and see how far we can push it and see what we can do with it. And so we spin it with, where's this one? So this is our main line, which is Heritage, which is the original one we started with. And it was originally spun as a 100% Hebridean, but the fibres were slightly too short for worsted spinning. So John, at the time, managed to spin, I think it was like 200 skeins, and then he was like, I can't do any more because it's driving me mad. And I was like, well, I can't let this one go to waste, but he suggested that we blend it in with Warbles, which has a slightly longer staple, so the Hebridean will spin with it, and it's a very similar colour. And we went from there, so we now spin it as 75 Hebridean and 25% Warbles. I think the Zorbles is from Devon, isn't it? It's from the Devon wool board.
Yeah, we buy it from like our local wool board. But the local wool board actually now it's the only one in the whole of the southwest. So we do tell them that we'd like things to be specifically from Devon, but they accept fibre from all the way down tippy end of Cornwall. As far over as like the Isle of Wight, I think it's like properly it's the main grading station, but we have a good relationship with them, and Adrian very kindly, like, they will sort of put things aside for us, and then they email us and they're like, this is one of your ones. So yeah, the wool is from Devon.
Yeah,
definitely. Shall I pass them around?
Yeah, do. So there's an original one there, and there's what we produce today, so you can see the difference.
Yeah,
because we're also
the original is so soft. It's amazing.
Yeah, I couldn't. I was because I did. The other thing is
you had some of that at EYF.
Oh, yeah, it was years ago. Yeah,
is that the original?
Yeah. I think it's like everyone will testify. Wow. When you basically buy this batch of wool. And then
the top as well.
Yeah, there's this is the new one, that's our old one, so you can see the difference in quality. You basically buy the wool and then you send it off and it goes through scouring and it goes through milling and it takes forever, and you get it back and you never are quite sure what you're going to get back. Yeah. Which is exciting and terrifying. And at any stage of that process, something could also go wrong and you'd lose the whole batch. So, it could get over-scoured, or a machine break, there's a whole manner of things. Yeah, so the box arrived and I was just thrilled to bits with what had come through. So, yeah. And sort of using the black wool as a base, we take that and we blend it with this is XMOW Blue Face blended in at 25%, so you can go into these lovely grey palette. I want to pass those along.
And you've got a sock yarn now as well.
I didn't bring that in yet.
Shall I go and see the sock yarn? Because the sock yarn's new and it's amazing.
And this is one that we spun a few years ago and they've redone it for the Mill Open weekend. This is Hebra Zebra, which it's the fibres in our Heritage with the XMOW Blue Face, but done as a marl.
It's nice.
Yeah, really nice. I like that.
And there's some swatches as well of the broom and the Heritage. Sorry, you're like
no, it's fine.
little conveyor belt.
I want to have a feel as well, so it's fine.
And I think there's a skein gone out somewhere of the woolen spun. It's a slightly chunkier skein, 100-gram skein. Where's it gone?
It's so fun, the Hebra Zebra. I'm glad that it worked this time. We had a little accident with
Shall we go? We maybe go into that later.
Yes, we could go into that later. And then here's the sock going round, and that you've done in like a gradient, haven't you?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, so I love knitting socks. So we've developed this sock yarn, which in the natural colours, and we're adding another 2 paler shades on. But it's using the same principle as with the heritage and the broom. So taking the Hebridean as the base and then seeing how far we can stretch that. I'm slightly confused where there's a woolen spun skein doing the rounds. Oh, I'm actually looking at it.
She knows what she's doing. I'm not just going to point at that one.
So this one, we work with another mill up in Yorkshire who would do woolen spinning, and they do our Ram Jam range, which comes from waste yarn, waste fibre, and then they spin 100% Hebridean. Ironically, it's too long for the woolen spinning, so they have to cut it before it's actually spun. Whereas it's too slightly. Yeah. So I send it to them, and they're like, "We'll have to say it's too long. We'll have to send it for cutting before they can spin it." Whereas here, with the worsted, we need to add something to make it spin.
I guess that's the thing with having a more rare breed sheep is all of so a lot of the machinery, which we will get onto later, is for doing specific things, which is how you end up with a lot of yarn being kind of the same. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I was like, wait, why are you cutting it? It's too long to go through the machine. So this is actually 100% Hebridean that we sell as a lace weight, but they also spin 100% Hebridean, and we do blankets and tweed as well. So, and that's all done on the Isle of Mull at Adar Lanish, if you know them. And if you ever get a chance to go, do go up there. It's just amazing. So, send that round.
Is that an undyed grey in there?
So
it's slightly blue.
No, that one's slightly blue, but it's our Ram Jam yarn, and then Jules from Wool and Flower.
Oh, lovely.
Overdyed it with indigo, and then they wove it in with the Hebridean.
I have to say, Helena has got
some
one
weight
of
to
these.
it, yeah.
Helena has got one of these in her spare bedroom, and when I spend the night with Helena, I am under this, and I am so warm and cosy. It's just the warmest thing. It's beautiful, Rachel.
Thank you. I think that's probably where we're at, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Hand it over to Marina.
Marina.
Cool. So I think similar to Becci and Markus, I started out hand dyeing very small batches. And as well as a dyer, I'm a designer. So my design work kind of informs what I want out of my yarn as well. So I have my Mendip range, which I've been developing over the last few years, and I specifically wanted a yarn that would work really nicely for colour work. And so the 4-ply, which came first, is a fairly traditional sort of Shetland style woolen spun yarn that's really good for colour work, so it's nice and bouncy. And I started coming up with it when I was working closely with Fernhill Farm, which is where I source the wool from. And they're on top of the Mendip Hills, hence the name. And they're the main reason I got into things more specifically in terms of what fibres I wanted to be working from, because when I was buying from wholesalers, I was making sure I was getting British wool, and I wanted to work with, at least you can get breed-specific wool from wholesalers, and that was something that was important to me. And I'm going to keep those ones because I'll explain a bit. Thank you. And even though I was buying yarn that I knew was British wool, so it was certified as having been grown here, I didn't know where it was spun. Because it's not infeasible for it to be sent abroad to be spun and then sent back again. And there was just no element of traceability. And I discovered Fernhill Farm when I was hand spinning and found that they were fairly local to me, and I bought a fleece from them and loved it and started working with them more and more closely. They're quite a big farm, they've got about 3,000 sheep, but they're an eco farm who are, they're certified in practicing regenerative agriculture, and so as you were saying about conservation grazing, they've got sheep that are well suited to their landscape. So again, they lamb outside. They're using the sheep in partnership with the landscape, so they're mimicking natural behaviour of the sheep and how that affects the grasslands, because it's an ex-industrial area. There used to be a lot of lead mining there. The land is not in great shape, and so they are using the sheep to better the land and vice versa. And although this isn't organically certified, they follow organic practices. And so that element of traceability and responsibility, and knowing that I'm working with fibre that is a net positive for the environment, because textile production is a bit of a nightmare environmentally on a global scale. And so I wanted to create something that, we're working with a local material, I know where it's come from, I can go and visit the animals and know that they're happy and kept well, and that we're also supporting farmers and livelihoods in this country. And so that's sort of why I wanted to be using my own base. And so what I ended up creating was, I knew that I really like dyeing on natural colours, but I also really like the clear, bright colours you get on a white yarn. So I have the same bases. There's the DK going around somewhere. This is the 4-ply. So I've got each one with a white one and a grey one, and it's the same lamb's wool. It's a mixed flock, so they, on Fernhill, strongly believe in hybrid vigour, so they breed their sheep specifically not to maintain breed standards, but for suitability to the environment, and so because they're dual purpose, so they are used for meat as well as for wool, they are trying to get as good a balance as they can with both of those. So they're breeding for quality of wool. So they've got Shetland, Romney, blue-faced Leicester, a little bit of Teeswater, and I think they've had a few different things in there in the past where they've sort of tried out various breeds to see what is suited, because the Mendips are a fairly harsh environment. But this is lamb's wool, so although it comes across as a slightly rustic yarn, it's actually really nice and soft. It's a fairly short fibre, which makes it nice and bouncy, and I wanted something that was going to be ideal for colour work. So with these colours, I dye the same shades on both the white and the grey, and so it makes creating colour palettes much easier, because I know that a lot of people love knitting colour work, but at the same time kind of struggle to put colours together. And so if you can say they're the same dye, there is no way they're not going to work together, that makes it so much easier to create a more interesting palette, because you've got contrast built in automatically. So I wanted to be working in a way that was going to create interesting colours, but using the natural colours of the sheep. So this is the white lamb's wool with about 20% of the really, really dark, black-brown lamb's wool blended in. So this gives a nice tweedy effect. And so I call them sunny and cloudy, because they're a lot of the colours are inspired by sort of the flora and fauna up on the Mendips, and local plants and animals. And yeah, so I have various things. Herons, because,
pass those.
Yes. Yeah, do you want to pass those together so you can see how that one knits up?
Got to pass to the panel first.
Yeah. Sorry. I was hoping I was going to be on the end of the conveyor belt.
That's lovely.
Oh, that is nice, yeah.
So you take all the fleeces and just blend everything together. So they are, with the lamb's wool, with the grown-up sheep, so the ones where it's not the first clip, they separate them out more specifically. So, you have a bale of white Shetland Romney, coloured Shetland Romney, and and then this is a Romney blue-faced Leicester. I feel like this one goes with this room quite nicely.
It does.
I didn't deliberately coordinate myself, I promise.
You rang ahead. You always do this.
Yeah.
Phone ahead. Check
What
the
colour's the
scheme of
room?
Then you know what to wear.
So yes, they do. So I learned, because I used to work at Fernhill as well, so I learned quite a lot about grading and sorting, and I have done some wool handling for them, and my goodness, is it hard work. Get a whole 6 kilo Romney fleece. I don't have the biceps for this. I have the reach, but not the strength. Wool handling, as they're shearing the sheep, you gather up the fleece, you grab it by the edges, which is where the legs are, because it's rolled up in a specific way. You chuck it out onto a sorting table, and the aim is to get it so that the fleece flies open and lands flat.
And not on the floor.
Yeah, and not on the floor. Yeah, skills.
And the moment it lands on the floor, it loses a lot of value.
Yeah,
because fleece is really sticky, obviously.
Yeah.
So things will just adhere to it. So it's important to not get it on the floor.
This one's
You get the eye.
DK.
Yeah.
So these ones are all my designs, and it's so nice. And because it's woolen spun, you can knit both the 4-ply and the DK at quite variable gauges.
Yeah.
So that one's fairly loosely knitted for a DK, but it means that it's really
It
light.
fills the holes, doesn't it? Fills
Yeah.
the gaps.
And then more DK things. this one's nice because it shows it off in a lace, and you don't often see that much DK lace. But it's a really simple one, but it's just so light. And this is a weird shape because if you want it a shawl that's long and still comes to a point but isn't as bulky as a triangle. And then the lace just makes it nice and lightweight.
Are there any questions from the audience? If not, I have some questions. I just want to check if this has thrown up anything from anyone. I'll fire away with my question then. Maybe if we go back in, or actually, neither of you haven't talked for a while. So, not,
I just had
you
to
were
run.
politely waiting. As is appropriate. So what have you learned throughout this process that's surprised you? How did you think the journey would be? And what's been surprising, I guess, both from a positive and then maybe what's been a challenge? Should we do the good first?
Yeah, let's do
And
good.
then we'll talk about the challenge.
I think the positive and surprise for us was how much of an impact it had on kind of the people that we worked with and also our local community. So because we did this very, very local project, the Northamptonshire, the word went round, didn't it?
Yeah, we had people coming.
We
with
had suddenly people
fleeces
coming in and
trailers.
we did have lots of people saying, hey, we've got some random wool, would you like it?
And how does that work on a practical level? So you kind of gather up everything, or do you look through it,
that was I mean we've been very picky about who we've worked with. We may have some new bases coming down the line, but
We went on to a field trip.
we did recently go to visit some new sheep, which is very exciting. But no, it was the positive impact on the people who keep the sheep. So they're keeping these small conservation flocks. There's not a lot of money in it, but of course we go and pay a lot more for the wool than what they would get from the wool board.
A lot more.
And so, for example, Chris and Barry, who keep the Leicester long wools, were able to buy a new ram because of the money that they got for the fleece. So they were able to then improve their flock because of that, and that was good. And
we did the hand sorting together, didn't we? With
yeah, and
cake
it's just you just end up having these lovely experiences as well. Like on Monday, the new Shetland flock the new Shetland flock that's near us, they were being shorn. So we went along, and it was really like a team effort of David was showing Bridget how the sheep how he shears the sheep, and then Lynn was teaching Bridget how Bridget's the new owner of this flock, like how to sort the wool when it comes off of the sheep.
It's like passing on all that knowledge, isn't it? Like,
and it's just all these little connections that have been made. And then there's things like that we discovered a weaver who works really nearby our studio as well. And she works with all natural fibres and has a big focus on British wool. And she met us, and then she met the people with the and there's just this lovely like local network building up of people. And so, yeah, the community side to it, that was a surprise and a really positive one. Yeah,
that's really nice. Yeah, I think I was really surprised by people's reaction to it when I first put this out, because I was like, are people actually going to want to use it, and is it going to be nice, and what sort of reaction is it going to get? And yeah, I was kind of blown away actually that people really were happy to embrace like such a naturally dark wool. That it can, you need really good lighting, and you can't knit for hours because it's difficult to knit with darker yarns. But from there, it enabled my business to grow. But I tried to put the money. I invested my own money to start with, and the money's gone back into the company. But then also, I've tried to work with companies who have similar philosophies. So the scourers there's 2 big scourers in the UK, and I use the smaller one, and they're all local people who are employed there, and they get all that, I know that they're looked after. Likewise, you employ locally, don't you? And I think that side of things has been really positive. The blankets go up to Mull, where they're woven, and that pays for somebody else's employment, and that side of things in the wool industry, and just trying to keep the skills alive as well in this country, because it's easy to send. I've had people say, oh, send it to Italy because they're brilliant at spinning. I'm like, I don't want to send it to Italy. I mean,
actually, what brilliant at spinning means is it will be similar to what most things are like. Like, I think there's lots of different ways to be brilliant at spinning, and like none of our yarn is even, and you could look at that and say it's technically incorrect, but like personally, that's what makes it interesting to me. So it just depends on, like, I don't know who decides what perfect spinning is,
what the standard
and I think as a crafter, what's nice is the variety. So
and we know whose hands it's passed through, and and that everybody is getting looked after.
And you do lots of things that aren't just the yarn as well. So you've built up this beautiful range of like cards, and it's all about like respecting the landscape and like tradition, and you've got a really curated sort of range of loveliness going on around the yarn as well.
That sort of happened by accident. I used to be a bookseller, and so I spotted a book that was being reissued by a little publisher in Dorset, and I was like, oh, that looks really interesting, and if I'm interested, then maybe my customers will be interested. And it literally went from there. And then I was like, oh, you make felted badges out of Welsh wool, I'd love to work with you. And so supporting, it's been really nice. And then in turn, I mean, we all kind of support each other, don't we, as well? So which is really nice. Yeah, definitely.
It is a very friendly industry. I used to work in engineering before, and everything was like non-disclosure agreements and trade secrets, and you couldn't. And if you left to go to a competitor, it was gardening leave and all that kind of thing. It was really strange coming into the wool industry. Everybody talks to each other, and everybody's happy to share knowledge. And
we're technically all competitors.
We are
the same kind of product, but we're
it is that whole thing about the rising tide lifting all boats. It definitely has that feel.
What would you say, Marina?
That, and going to a show or an event and knowing that I'm going to be able to like see people I know, because you get to know people quite quickly in the industry, and the people who are working towards a similar thing. And I think one of the points where I decided I wanted to start working with local farmers was, I think you did an interview with Pom Pom.
Oh gosh, that was
way back.
Yeah,
way back.
It's a long while ago.
And that was massively inspirational for me.
Oh, thank you.
And because I had already been thinking, like, I don't know really what has happened to the fibre in this yarn. And so that was there were quite a few things, but like just being able to work with people who are interested in similar things but not cagey about things.
Yeah, and I think we sort of think, like, if you are, like, people are very generous because there's so much to learn, isn't there? And that it's really important that information is passed on. Yeah. And I think if, like, for the ones who are cagey and they won't be around for very long. We all sort of really need
because then you go to a show and it's like, there was no point in talking to you last time. You weren't fun. I found that working closely with Fernhill, I didn't really know anything about farming beforehand, and I didn't know what. I went from thinking, merino is a breed of sheep, that's why they keep saying merino on things, to like, okay, this one, I think there's probably a bit of blue-faced Leicester in there, okay, no, that's definitely some Shetland, okay, put that in the BFL Shetland crosses, like, going from knowing nothing to suddenly being very familiar with breed characteristics, and like, there's a small range of ones that I know quite well, but having that knowledge and knowing why certain yarns are used for certain things, and having that, again, because I'm designing, like, inform my knitting, like, I tell people, probably don't use Mendip for socks. It's woolen spun, it's lamb's wool, it's quite soft, it's a really short fibre.
They do anyway though, right?
They do. If you do a limited edition batch and someone buys like one skein, it's like, please don't use it for socks. You can use it for socks, it's your choice, but
just don't put your feet on the floor.
Yeah, just socks like this and it's all fine.
I think that's definitely something that, like, at John Arbon's since I've been here, I try and really focus on. It's like having having yarns that are good for different purposes. And when you touch lots of different bases, and especially all your gorgeous, like, they are so noticeably different, you know, and it's just then, because then it really gets your brain ticking over of like, oh, well, what can I do with this specific thing? And then it kind of teaches you to be a bit more creative and kind of think outside the box with your crafting, I think.
Definitely.
You know, and sometimes, like, I remember one of the first things I ever knitted was like a waterfall cardigan in silk in the pattern, and then I made it in like Jameson's and Spindrift, and it actually just stood out like this. I just like the colour. So, like, there is a real journey, you know, like, and you have to try these things.
You do,
Exactly. It was like, that's why there was silk in there. You know?
I think that leads quite well into, like, what we learned that was maybe more of a negative, which was that when you come out with a breed-specific yarn, or a yarn that is quite different to, say, like the merino nylon that everybody's used to, we slowly realised that we really had to put effort into educating people as well. So I can't just put that on a shelf and say, here, buy my Leicester Longwool, because people don't know what to do with it, or it's just so different, they're a bit afraid of it. And so it was that kind of slowly understanding that. I mean, I got interested in wool because I'm an engineer by background, so I just went like straight down the hand spinning, let's try all the different kind of things that you can do. And then, so when you start hand spinning, you very quickly discover that there are different types of wool from different breeds, and they all have different characteristics. So I came into, like, we started RiverKnits already with that knowledge of wool and the characteristics. So for me, maybe it was more obvious what I would do with the different yarns, but I had to also communicate that as well. So that was a challenge, and also from a very RiverKnits perspective, because we started as yarn dyers, we had superwash yarns in our range in the beginning. And to take customers on a journey from here's some, beautifully dyed colours, but it's on a base that you're quite kind of comfortable with, and going, okay, but now we're going here. That was quite a journey and quite challenging. And I guess we probably lost some people along the way, but then we gained people who really love the woolly wool and all the different characteristics.
We have our yarn is always non-superwash.
Everything is non-superwash.
All British fleeces.
A lot of it is breed specific as well. So it was communicating that. That was a big challenge and a bit scary, to be honest.
We did this during lockdown, changed over, didn't we?
In lockdown, we got rid of the last of our superwash yarns and moved everything to non-superwash. And it was the best decision. Honestly, it went really well. We were a bit worried, but it was, really good decision.
You never know how people react.
Definitely. How about you? We had an accident with your, with your special.
I wasn't going to talk about that. I was going to talk about a different accident at a different mill.
Blame the other people. We all get it right
It's been a year, let me just say, it's been a year. I think it's, go on, you can tell the tale if you like.
What happened is Rachel's special for the open weekend, that gorgeous flecky marl, the Hebra zebra, it's absolutely beautiful. And you and John made it for the first time, was it in 2018?
I think it was 2018. Yeah.
And the way you make it is, if you've been on a mill tour, or if you're going on one later, we've got two spinners, and one of them's very big and spins straight from top, and the other one has quite an elaborate system to feed into it. So you're always combining two ends of roving and then drafting it through. And John was talking about how it would be fun to put two radically different colours on there, so you can really see some flecking. And there was a lot of playing and experimenting that happened.
Yeah, which I didn't realise.
And let's just say it didn't get written down on the bit of paper quite correctly.
Because John was spinning it as a fun project.
And it was amazing yarn.
And it's quite, once he gets his head into something, that's his little project for that week or whatever. And he'd done loads of testing. But then he hadn't written down what the final one was.
Which is completely understandable, because it was supposed to be a one-off, and I must say I would probably do the same thing myself. John and I are too similar. But then the trouble is then when one's let's do that batch again. And so we got the bit of paper out, but of course the bit of paper wasn't blank. It had wrong information on it. No. So then we just merrily made this thing. And then it was but it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, and I was that's not right.
Oh no. Best to just leave the paper blank, I feel.
It probably would have been.
I do that with dye recipes.
And it didn't work.
But that's the trouble with working with mills, especially when it's your livelihood and it's your fibre and you're sending it off and you are putting it in someone else's
and you have to wait a year for more fibre.
It's not
you can't just go and get some more.
Exactly. Or if something's really popular, then
if things sell out, then it's
to grow more.
It's all gone.
I know. I had my other one has been. It ended up being a 4-year project, and I'd got some fibre from a really lovely farm up in the Dales, and I bought 2 clips off them of it was a black Blueface Leicester and black Wensleydale, and it was too long to be spun at your mill, so I'd been sent over to a different mill who specialise in long wools. And I dropped it off, and we talked through what I wanted, and I talked about the fleece, and I was I'd like a 4-ply weight in 50-gram skeins. Can you please blend the 2 breeds together so it's just all the same colour? And I waited and waited and waited to hear back from them. And about 2 years later, 18 months later, I got an email saying, okay, so we've sorted the fleece into different colours, and it's not the breeds you told us it was. So we're going to do this, this, and this. And I was like, hang on, no, hang on a minute. So we went back through everything and agreed to certain things, and I waited and waited and waited, and yeah, it was about 4 years from collecting the first batch of fleece. I finally got this box of yarn, which was, it was absolutely incredible, like such gorgeous yarn. But it was a DK, it was spun as a DK, it was in 2 different colours, and every skein out of, there was about 180 skeins, was a different weight. So I had some that were like 30 grams up to 120 grams. I have no idea. I have literally no idea. So then but there's nothing you can do because it's spun. So then what do you do? But I literally had to sell it by the gram. Yeah, because it was too beautiful to go to waste. Yeah, so that was fun.
Yeah. Tell me who this is later, please. I've had one where the spec of my mendip has changed, the 4-ply has changed, because it was originally spun at a different mill, and the next batch I got was just a slightly different weight, but it was close enough to be fine, and it was like a tiny bit of extra meterage, so I was like, cool. And then going back to the previous ones, it's like, these cones are not the same weight. They're just slightly different, just a tiny bit different. And so I then realised that it was just a little bit slightly all over the place, even though it was all supposedly spun to the same spec. And so when I moved mills, magically everything was all good and fine, and the spec is even and it's what it's meant to be every time, and I just had to update what the yarn is like. And another one which is both sort of a positive and a challenge is with the cloudy base, which is the grey one. That is the light lambswool mixed with the dark lambswool. That has replaced what I had before, which was a stormy base, which was a warmer beige, which was a mix of all of the true Shetland colours. And it was a little bit more rustic. And I ended up not being able to spin that one anymore, simply because the warmer brown coloration genetics are recessive, and so gradually they just had fewer and fewer of those sheep in the flock just because of how their breeding was going, and it ended up that they weren't able to supply enough of that colour blend to make that yarn on an ongoing basis. So I moved across to the grey, which is really nice, and it still has that lovely heatheriness. And it is nice to not have to explain to people, like, the stormy is a little bit more rustic than the other one. But yeah, it's just, when you're working with material that is coming from living, breathing animals, and just how things, the texture of things can vary from one batch to another.
Like if they have a good year or stressful lambing or something.
If the weather's been bad, that changes the length of the fibre.
And the same working with mills that have real humans in them. Sometimes the humans don't do as they're told either, because we are all only human and things do go wrong.
Because I think that's how the broom yarn came about, was because I think it was like the 3rd clip or something that I worked with, and it had all been running fine, and I sent the 3rd clip in, and I was literally, I was on this wool kind of conference, and I was on the top of a hill in Lewis, on the top of a hill, it wasn't a mountain. And I got a phone call from, it was Juliet phoned, and she was like, so we've got a problem. And I was like, no! But they couldn't. The Hebridean that had come through was too short.
Yeah.
So we developed the broom, blending it in with the blue-faced Leicester, so that we could still use the shorter fibre. Yeah. And then it became a yarn in its own right. So
it definitely involves thinking on your toes, doesn't it? Trying to do something different. You just have to adapt.
Yeah,
you do. You definitely have to work with the fibre rather than trying to get the fibre to do a thing.
To do what you want it to. Yeah.
Like as much as you can think, okay, I'd like to make this kind of yarn. What can I get to make that?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
On an ongoing basis, that is so difficult when you're working in the way that we all do.
Definitely.
It's such a roller coaster.
I mean, that's the fun of it though. And that does mean that if you fall in love with something that's a small batch, it might be different next time. So you do want to just get it if you like it, you know. I'm conscious that we're out of time, but if anyone did have a question.
I have a little question.
Yeah, of course.
Do any of you find that the breed, the fleece from the same breed, varies from year to year or from season to season?
Yeah, I mean, you get variation. Obviously, you get maximum variation between different sheep breeds, but then within a breed. So, for example, Shetland.
From the same flock, from the actual.
So and actually within the same fleece.
Yeah.
So you've got the finer wool at the neck, and then you've got the coarser.
You go back and get from the same farmer, from the same sheep the following year, the same fleece.
Yeah, so it'll depend a lot on what kind of year the flock has had.
If it's dry or wet and boggy and...
Yeah, or if the ewes had stressful lambing, or if they get stressed. So some of the Shetland fleece that we were collecting on Monday was from castrated wethers, so they're boys who've been castrated, and their fleece is absolutely beautiful because they're not getting stressed at all.
They're having a chill time.
They're just hanging out in a field, no lambing, no nothing. So their fleece is beautiful and probably will just continue to be beautiful year on year. But the ewes is very different, and you can take. So when you're inspecting the fleece, you take a lock, a staple, and sort of snap it between your hands, and sometimes it will break. And if there's a weakness there because the ewes had a difficult year or whatever. So yeah, yes is the answer.
Were there any others?
No problem.
Yeah, of course. No, of course. I will also say that what we'll do is we'll put all the samples back on the table as well, and then these lovely folks will just be here, so you can come and grill them about things. But please do go ahead with this question.
How has it affected your knitting? Because, like your approach to knitting, because obviously hand knitting, everything is always going to be slightly different and a reflection of you as a knitter. But then having this kind of, a deeper appreciation for specific breeds and knowing what goes into it, has it changed how you knit?
Yeah, completely. Like I was knitting some socks with a merino nylon, just the one that you'll kind of see a lot of dyers use, and I was like, it's so stringy and
really cottony.
Yeah, and it feels like weird on my feet, and
it's not very warm.
And it's not very warm, and it's not very comfy. And I'm like, I've got so used to knitting with woolly wools.
Yeah, it goes floppy.
Yeah. And I think that's you were saying about like the whole like trying to take people on the journey and going from like a superwash merino nylon to a woolly wool. It's also because a lot of people do pick this up and go, oh, it's so coarse and it's itchy and it's this, but I always say, well, it's not. You're not going to buy Hebridean wool to knit as a big cowling. You're just not, but it's fantastic for outer layers, and you'll have it for years, and it'll wear like iron. So
it gets softer with time.
It does as well. Like I have jumpers that I used to have I wear a lot of collared shirts anyway, but I used to have to wear shirts like with the collar popped so that it wouldn't touch my neck.
Yeah.
And since I've been telling myself like, no, just you like woolly wool, come on. And over years of that, like those jumpers that I've had for years, I can wear like with a little strappy top underneath, and it's no problem at all. Like you do get used to it.
Johnny's mum, so Sally, who founded Garth, she's got a like Herdwick, and it's what, like 20 years old. This Herdwick jumper, and it's amazingly soft now. It feels like the Shetland that's been floating around. And Herdwick is the most rustic breed. Yeah. But if you wear it for 20 years, it'll feel amazing. You just got to pass the beer sometimes. Yeah. It's like a pair of jeans, like rather than buying the jeans aged, you know. Yeah. You have to wear it in bed, like an old-fashioned
dressing gowns. My thing's dressing gowns.
Beat it up a little bit.
Exactly. Do you get asked a lot of lots of babies? It seems to often be in yarn shops or vendors where people are, because people knit for babies.
Well, I knitted for babies. I mean, our son was like really young. Did you do that Jacob jumper for him, or did I do
You made it.
Yeah, so I did a Jacob DK jumper from our...
Oh, it's 4-ply.
Was it 4-ply?
Yeah, you did a colour work. That doesn't really matter what the weight was. But it was from Jacob wool. We haven't got any of the Jacob wool with us today. Yeah. But you did him a colour work jumper. And he wore it loads, and it softened loads.
Yeah, when he was teething, and then he was like, wasn't he like dribbling?
Oh, are you thinking of the... So I hand spun some wool and made Bryn a little V-neck like vest thing. And that wasn't a good choice because he drooled so much that it felted the neck and it shrunk. And he got to the point where I couldn't get it over his head because he dribbled and felted this woolly thing. It's just like...
He was a baby.
He was a baby. It was a lovely little thing, but
But he's used to like woolly wool.
We've put him in woolly wool since he was a baby, so he's totally fine with it.
The same with mine. Yeah, it's like, well, I dress my son in this, so works for him.
But the problem, you do get people coming into. We have a little shop and shows. Yeah, is this suitable for kids? Like, yes, it is, but are the parents going to hand wash it?
That's the other thing.
So I tend to
kind of high maintenance.
Be very clear about the amount of. Well, my machine won't wash hand knits without shrinking them.
Mine does a gentle cycle.
Yeah, it has that, but it's not actually gentle.
You just got to experiment.
Yeah, you've got to risk it with your machine with something, but we have to be very clear about what kind of care the garment's going to need, and some people will walk away and that's fine. And some people are like, I already hand wash woolens, and it's like, okay, great, go for it. So
do you find that you get a lot of questions about like, what can I use this for? Do you, like, obviously more than you did when you were doing like super falls and that kind of thing?
We do more and more kits like pattern with the wool.
You do get a lot, so I have to make sure I've got samples at the ready, but also we work with designers and do some design ourselves, so it's like, here's a thing you can make with this wool, this is what it looks like, this is what it feels like, go for it.
But we give options as well, don't we? Like,
especially with colours.
Colour combinations are good.
Well, thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And as I said, we're going to pop all the samples back on the table, and Rachel will be on her stand, but Marina and Becci and Markus will be here next to their samples. So
ask us any questions.
Are you going to start?